up, everyone? Welcome to Back to the Future, the podcast that takes a trip down Philly sports memory lane and asks the question, what if? I'm your host, Jim Montgomery. Follow me on Twitter and TikTok at Jimbo_Mont. On Instagram at JimboKU. I got to work on that. That's just not a good one, but I don't think I can change it at this point. So what are you going to do? So it's been a very busy week since the last time I spoke to you on Back to the Future. The biggest thing is I took this day in Philly sports history, turned it into a micro podcast. So you can now find that if you're not into watching on YouTube or the videos. You can find that same place you find Back to the Future. We are on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Apple Music, iHeartRadio. So go ahead, check it out, give it a like. That way it comes right to your inbox every day as soon as I post it. I'm posting this day in Philly sports history every day. I have it up by 8 o'clock, basically just taking a small snippet of what happened that day in Philly sports, describing sort of the impact and things that happened. So definitely, like I said, it's like a little mini. If you're a Back to the Future listener, I think you will like it because it's just a small snippet to start your day. The other big news is the Phillies are officially playoff bound after beating the Braves last night 3-0. Aaron Nola looked really, really good, by the way. He had a perfect game, I think, going into like the 7th inning or something. So good time for your ace to step up and pitch like an ace. So hopefully that is a sign of things to come. Their opponent is still to be determined. Right now, they'd be going to St. Louis Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for that 3-game series. They actually they won the season series against the Cardinals this year, so hopefully that will be how it stays. There is still the outside chance that they'll play the Mets or the Braves, depending on how that shakes out. As I'm recording right now, the Mets are currently beating the Nationals 4-2 in the 7th. So if that score should stand, they would be one back of the Braves with each team having 2 left to play. So it's definitely going to come down to the wire for that. And part of me is like, I don't want no parts of the Mets because of how they just dominated the Phillies this year. But at the same time, the Mets are in a free fall right now. So it might be the perfect time to play them. So as I mentioned earlier in the week on this day in Philly sports history, I'm just glad they're in. It's been 11 years, and what they do, I'll do a Phillies preview on that podcast later this week, but who knows? I mean, depending on which team shows up, they could do something. You never know. I know they've been very streaky, and if they get on one of those hot streaks, they're pretty unstoppable. So we'll see what happens. Definitely pumped about that. The Eagles, of course, won their 4th game. I was very pleased with the way that game went because they got punched in the mouth and they responded the right way. So hopefully that is a sign of things to come. I was very pleased at the way the entire offense played. It was a messy conditions. It was windy, rainy. They pounded the ball. They didn't try to force things. Jalen Hurts made throws when he had to. The defense really stepped up and shut it down when they had to as well. So this, I think, is basically a thing that is going to be a stepping stone for the future. Everybody keeps saying, oh, well, who have they played? They played the Lions. They played Washington. They played Minnesota. And they played the Jack. Who cares? Listen, 4-0 is 4-0. I think you can only play who is on your schedule. And those same people, if they had been 3-1 or 2-2 at this point, they'd be the same people. They would say, oh, well, they're horrible. They should be 4-0 with that schedule. So you can't please anybody. Haters are going to hate. Let them hate. And I don't think this is any worse than a team from like the SEC or the Big Ten playing the entire MAC schedule before they opened up the Big Ten schedule. So, yeah, I'm looking at you, Penn State. But anyway, on to this week's Back to the Future. Going to go back to 1993. I talked a little bit about this earlier in the week on This Day in Philly Sports History. But 1993 was an interesting year for the Eagles, I guess would be a good way to put it. And they came into the season, that was the year before in 1992 was the bringing home for Jerome Brown year, that he died that previous offseason in the car accident. And I think I mentioned previously on this podcast too about meeting him and just saying that this year or 1992 was going to be the year that it was the Eagles' year. Healthy number 12, he said. The fact that the Eagles' defense was just so dominant. He said that we're going to be even better with him being healthy, and then having him pass away, I think, kind of put a damper on that. And that whole rally cry was bringing home for Jerome. They had the song that was always played on the local radio stations, and they ended up they went 11-5 that year, first playoff win since 1981. They exercised those Buddy Ryan demons and got over that hump. It was Randall, that defense. Unfortunately, they lost Reggie White to free agency that year. That was a result of the whole free agency battle and just lawsuits. And I'll be honest, I don't necessarily know and remember the specifics of the legalities of it, but I do know that Reggie White was sort of the poster child. I remember the Sports Illustrated cover where he had all the different jerseys, and it was like, where's he going to go? And I do have a future episode on this. The rumor was he was willing to come back to the Eagles for less money. He never wanted to leave. Norman Braman didn't offer him anything. Norman Braman claims he did offer him. Either way, Reggie White went to Green Bay because that's where God told him to go. And to me, it makes sense because, I mean, he wanted to come back. I don't see why him or his wife, after he died, would say anything different. But again, that's a whole other episode for another time. So even with losing Reggie White that offseason to free agency, there's definitely a lot of promise coming into that season for the Eagles. I think they went like I said, they went 11-5, finally exercised those playoff demons. The NFC was pretty wide open, I would say. I mean, you had the Cowboys, who were the defending champs, and with the benefit of hindsight, we know that team and those Cowboys teams were one of the all-time great teams based on how many Super Bowls they won in that span and just the players they had. You had the Niners with Steve Young. You had the Lions, who were okay. They had Barry Sanders. I think they always had some question marks at quarterback during that time. You had the Giants, who were still, they had just won 2 Super Bowls within the past 10 years. The Packers, who now had Reggie White and a younger Brett Favre. Believe it or not, yes, Brett Favre was young at one point. Besides the fact he has all his legal issues and probably is going to go to jail, but that, none of my business. But they were still about a year away from competing with them. So that Eagles team coming into the 1993 season had some promise, had some hope. I mean, Randall was finally playing well and getting adjusted to Rich Kotite's offense. And that summer was the summer of the Phillies. That they started that 93 season with a 3-game sweep of the Astros and rode that into the World Series. So as a city and as a fan base, Philadelphia was ready. And I think they wanted nothing more. The way that the 92 season had ended, and I think I can't overstate this enough, because to me, finally getting that first playoff win and getting that monkey off their backs of that core team that was Buddy Ryan's crew, I think was just huge. And I think going into that 93 season, they were ready and they were ready to take that next step. I know as a fan, I was ready for them to take that next step. I think all of us were. And if the Phillies taught us anything that summer, it was, hey, why not us? And the season opened and it was just they came out and they were inconsistent. They would fall behind early in games, but then they would come back and win. So they went 3-0 before their first bye week. And back then, I forget how many years the NFL did it, but they experimented with 2 bye weeks. So their first bye week came after 3 games. So it was great. Like, here you are, boom, boom, boom. You're 3-0. You see what the issues are. You're falling behind. So it gave Kotite and his coaching staff time to say, you know what? Let's figure out what we're doing at the beginning of games and how can we improve that so we're not falling behind, because it is going to bite us in the ass at some point. And then I'm laughing because then you realize, oh yeah, it's Rich Kotite. But week 4, they went up to the Meadowlands to play the Jets, and once again, they fell behind early. They were down like 21-0, I think, early in the second quarter. Scored a couple touchdowns. They were down 28-14 at one point. And typical and same things of that entire season, they were behind. They battled back. And the highlight and one of my all-time favorite Eagle memories was Eric Allen late in the fourth quarter. And I don't think it was to win the game. I think it was one of those game sealers. Like the Jets were driving, but intercepted Boomer Esiason, returned it 94 yards for a touchdown to win the game. And the run back was just incredible. Like, he's weaving up and down the field. I remember running through my parents' basement like, go, go, go. And it just was pure elation. Like, it was so much fun. Hey, the Eagles are 4-0 and they're finding ways to win. They keep coming back, but that game came at a cost. And the cost was Randall Cunningham broke his leg, was going to be out, I think, like 2 months, which for the most part, that was the entire season. Arkansas Fred Barnett, their number one receiver, tore his ACL, and I don't think he was ever the same after that. I think that was one of those guys. He had so much potential, and I think this injury, this game, this season ruined his career. I don't think he was ever able to come back. I feel as though if that happened today, he would have been able to probably come back and have a pretty successful career. I don't want to say he would be like a Hall of Famer or anything, but I always liked Fred Barnett. He was a speedster. He was able to get down the field. He had good hands. But that ACL tear in that game really set him back. So needless to say, either way, the Eagles are 4-0. Things are looking good. The defense was playing pretty well. You had Herschel Walker and Heath Sherman where they weren't great, but they were pretty solid. Like, I think that would be the word, a solid 1-2 punch at running back, which is something the Eagles always had issues with for as long as I could remember. But they were solid. I mean, there's no other way to put it. Problem is, your quarterback is Bubby Brister. And Bubby Brister was he just was not good. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. He was not good. I know he had some flashes and some moments when he was in Pittsburgh, but Pittsburgh went through this spell where they won their 4 Super Bowls in the 70s, and then they didn't go back to a Super Bowl until I think it was 94, so a year after this. So yeah, I'm not going to say Bubby Brister was the reason the Steelers did not go to a Super Bowl for that long of a stretch, but I think he played a role in like just not having them get over the hump. And I don't want to say it was 100% on him, but guys like that were like the epitome, I feel, of why this is. Because I didn't know the Steelers growing up when I became a football fan as the Steelers. I just knew them as Oh yeah, they won a bunch of Super Bowls back either before I was born or when I was young. They were a terrible team there for a while in the mid to late '80s and even into the early '90s. I think it was probably like around this time when basically when they got rid of Bubby Brister that they actually started being somewhat decent. And I still question this, and I have to bring it up only because it's when I hear the name Bubby Brister, other than this season, it's the first thing that pops in my head. I had a football coach in seventh grade, Bill Brocious, and he somehow, and I don't know the connection, and if Mr. B, if you're out there listening, if anybody listening out here knows the story, please let me know because I was trying to figure it out with my brother this weekend and we couldn't figure it out. But he always said that he intercepted Bubby Brister, and I don't know whether it was in college because I know Bubby Brister went to Tulane and then he went to like a smaller school in Louisiana. I don't remember where Brocious said he played, and again, like the details at this point are sketchy, but I don't know. That's a tangent that I don't even know why I'm bringing up right now, but it just is something that stuck out. And like as I was researching this, I'm like, damn it, Bubby Brister, Coach B used to always say, "Oh, I intercepted Bubby Brister," blah 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 blah. And Brocious, if you're out there, let me know if anybody knows him or knows this story. Please let me know because I'm dying to remember. So anyway, I digress. And let's get back to the 93 season. So here you are, you're 4-0. You have Bubby Brister as your quarterback. You don't have Reggie White on your team. And you're playing against in the same division as the Cowboys. You have a Steve Young-led 49ers team. So you're 4-0. And it kind of scares me somewhat now because the Eagles now are 4-0. And usually if you're 4-0, you're in good shape. And they would go on. They lost 6 straight games after that. Kind of pulled it together and finished 8-8. I don't necessarily think they got blown out too many times, but I don't think that there was like they weren't in games. It wasn't like, all right, we're just on a little losing streak. We're gonna come back. No. They just basically the season was over after Barnett and Cunningham went down. Some highlights from that season, if you could call it that, and I mean, this is like to me, this is like the perfect Philly sports story. And yeah, there's some of my Negadelphia negative fandom coming out here, but like who else would this happen to? 4-0. Your starting quarterback, number one receiver, basically are out for the season. Yeah, why not? Don Shula came to the vet, and the Eagles lost to a bad Dolphins team. Don't get me wrong. They were like, I think Dan Marino was hurt or might have already retired. I don't remember. Marino didn't play in that game. But sure, bad Dolphins team come in, and Don Shula got his record for the most wins, 326, against the Eagles at the vet the year that they started 4-0 and everybody got hurt. Why not? Do you want a little bit more of a dig for that? And I didn't know this until I was doing the research for this, but guess who the quarterback for the Dolphins were that day? If you guessed Doug Peterson, you would be right. That name sound familiar? Yeah, Doug Peterson actually came into Philly and got a win. Couldn't do it when he was a quarterback under Andy Reid a couple years later, but hey, it is what it is. I found that little nugget very, very amusing, especially considering he was just in town and we just did the last pod on him. But overall, though, I mean, I think you got to say, and back then it was different. Now I think if you're a lot of times you have a decent backup quarterback if you're a decent team. So you look at what the Eagles did in 2017. Carson Wentz goes down. Nick Foles was able to lead them to the Super Bowl. That is the anomaly. But usually your backup quarterback, if you're a good team, is not that bad. I mean, you look at what the Patriots did under Belichick for all those years. The year that Brady got hurt the first game of the season, Matt Castle came in and won 11 games, and they missed the playoffs still. So it's just one of those things. I don't think it was bad for your starting quarterback who was coming off an MVP type season in 1992 and hit the top weapon. It makes it hard for the backup quarterback to do anything. I mean, nothing against Bubby Brister, again, but I mean, he had Calvin Williams, who once Fred Barnett's done, everybody's knows who else you're going to throw it to? Calvin Williams. And I think Victor Bailey was on that team. I can't remember. There was somebody else who ended up playing a few years for the Eagles, but I just remember Victor Bailey, Calvin Williams, and Fred Barnett were like the top three receivers going into that season. So, but I think what this did was the fact that they were able to go 8-8 with all of that controversy and losing your top quarterback. I think it gave me anyway some high hopes for 1994. I feel you came into the 1993 season as one of the top teams in the NFC. You have your quarterback coming back, and it's not like before when he tore his ACL. He only had a broken leg. So once your bone heals, you'd have been fine. Barnett, that was a different story. As I mentioned, I don't think he was ever the same after that, but what are you going to do? So I felt going into 1994, you got some good things in place. Free agency now is a thing. So you could fill some of those holes. Maybe go out and get a receiver. Maybe go out and improve the defense. So I think for tonight's episode, there's 3 different ways we could go with this what if. And it's not often that your starting quarterback and your number one receiver get hurt in the same game, and let alone the same game and then out for the season. So it was tough for me to choose which way to go with this, but I think you can go 3 different ways. What if Randall didn't get hurt? What if Arkansas Fred didn't get hurt? And what if both of them ended up staying healthy? And let's start. What happens if Randall got hurt, but Barnett didn't? If Barnett had stayed healthy in that game and not tore his ACL. I mean, Bubby was bad. Don't get me wrong. And he was a solid kind of game manager quarterback if he had some weapons around him. And he was the guy whose number one receiver in Pittsburgh was Louis Lips. So if you give him some talent, I mean, like I said, Herschel and Heath Sherman were not a bad sort of, neither one of them were going to be an all-pro running back on their own at that time. But you put them both together and it's solid, it's serviceable. And like I said, it's better than anything you've had in Philly, for me, as long as you can remember. You're going to throw out Andrew Toney, or Anthony Toney, or I forget which one. I always get them confused. One played for the Sixers and one played for the Eagles. And both of them were, the one was, I think Andrew Toney was the one that played for the Sixers, and Anthony Toney. I'll have to look that up and let you know. But either way, the running back that played for the Eagles was horrible. But again, as bad as Bubby was, having your number one receiver with a solid running back helps, because as I mentioned, you had Williams and Barnett. That was the duo. So he would have had some weapons. The defense still wasn't horrible at that point. And I think it's hard to imagine them not being able to win one more game. So they went 8-8 with both Barnett and Cunningham out. If Barnett's in there, like I can't believe that they don't win one more game, because some of those games they lost were close. And like if you're losing, I think they lost one of the games to the Giants 7-3. You mean to tell me, like, yeah, you can't score an extra touchdown or something? Like, I just feel like they win one more game, that gets them into the playoff conversation, because 2 9-win teams went to the playoffs that year. So I think maybe they get a win in the wild card round. I don't know if they advance past the wild card round with Bubby Brister, but you get into the wild card round, all of a sudden now you're in that timeline when Randall's coming back from a broken leg, And yeah, it might be tough for him to come back after 2 months off and be thrown right into a playoff game. But I've seen Donovan McNabb do similar things. Donovan, he broke his ankle and came back in first playoff game, and they should have gone to the Super Bowl that year. So you never know, and I think Randall was the kind of guy that would have pushed himself, I think, to come back. I still say, like, after winning that playoff game in '92, they had that taste in their mouth and they wanted more. So you never know what would have happened, but I do think if Barnett didn't get hurt, they do improve. Now, if Randall doesn't get hurt, I'm going to say this again, probably for about the 100th time today. Bubby Brister was bad. So if Randall doesn't get hurt, but Fred Barnett still goes, there is no chance they still go 8-8. They are still one of the better teams. Yes, it sucks that you lost your number one receiver, but I still think they get 10 or 11 wins. And that's basically in line with what they've done every year since they started going to the playoffs, since the pre-Buddy Ryan days. And I think even going back prior to that, the 1987 season with the strike and the replacement players, I think they won, I think, 8 games that year. I think they would have won probably 9, 10 games that year if they didn't have the replacement players. Sure, they missed Barnett, but I think with Randall as your quarterback, and he's still, at this point, one of the top players in the league, Calvin Williams has a big year. I think because of the way they're going to have to maneuver, not having their number one receiver, I think it opens things up a lot for Herschel Walker. I think Herschel Walker probably could get close to almost 1,000, 1,200 total scrimmage yards. I definitely think they make the playoffs as a wild card. I don't know if they would have won the 12 games or 13 games that the Cowboys did that year. But you make that wild card, you're the 4th, 5th seed, and maybe they win a playoff game and then lose in the next round. You never know. Again, they could have gotten hot. Randall was that player back then. And I think he was kind of like when Brady's in the playoffs, when Rodgers is in the playoffs, when Mahomes is in the playoffs, when Josh Allen. If that is the quarterback of your team, you're always in play to win. So I think they definitely win a playoff game if Randall doesn't get hurt that year. And depending on how things fall, who knows? And I do think this is the scenario that has the most potential and is probably, especially the way that season has started, because I think they just got off to a slow start. Things were different. They were adjusting with free agency and everything, but they were finding those ways to win. And those are things why I like this Eagles team this year that you like to see. Teams that find ways to win. Yeah, I don't like the fact that they were getting down 21-0 to the Jets at the time, which the Jets, when I was a kid, weren't that. I mean, they had a couple years, I guess, when they weren't that bad. But they were finding ways to win. I think their schedule was pretty favorable. If you look at that schedule they had in 1993, especially where the byes were, 11 and 12 wins is not out of the question. And I think a lot of it would be dependent upon how they did in the division. Because as it stands, they only won 2 games in the division that year, both of them against Washington. So you win 2 more games. You split with Dallas. You split with the Giants. Because I think the Cardinals were still in the division at that time. I'd have to look at that. I think it wasn't until like another year or 2 later that they were out of the division. So, I mean, you got to be able to win 2 more division games, and there's your 10 wins, and you have your number one receiver, your starting quarterback. That's got to be at least another win or 2. So there you go, 11 and 12. The Cowboys won 12 games that year, and the sky's the limit, man. Like, depending on where your seeding was, how it played out with the Cowboys, they definitely could have been a run or gone on a run. They could have hung with the Cowboys. They always, like, it's a division game. They could have played the Niners because, again, the Niners weren't quite there yet. I think the next year was when they won, I believe. So they already had that playoff monkey off their back. As I mentioned, You have the best quarterback or one of the top quarterbacks in the game, MVP candidate. Who knows what's happened? Randall obviously was playing well. Maybe him and Cote had it all figured out before the injury, and they were just kind of going through the bumps of free agency and getting things in. They're probably not a Super Bowl team yet, to borrow a line from Doug Peterson, but I think the sky's the limit. Maybe they had figured it out and they were going to be that next elite team. Maybe it would have been them, the Cowboys, the 49ers, and the Packers. And then all of this happens, and 1994, hopes were high. That could have been the year, especially if they didn't get hurt, that Kotite figured it out. But, as we all know, in 1994, that was the year that Kotite actually became Rich Kotite. I think he was okay with 91 because Randall got hurt. 92, he took them to the playoffs, won their first playoff game in 11 years. And the next year, Randall and Fred Barnett got hurt and they were out for the season. And I'll talk more about this in a later episode because I think this season in and of itself needs its own sort of episode. And I feel like I could have done an episode and did a 2-part series on the life and times of Rich Kotite as Eagles coach. But the following year, they started off 7-2. 7-2. So when I know some of you are probably like, oh, yeah, here we go with the high hopes in 94, drinking the green Kool-Aid. But guess what? They were 7-2. And then Rich Kotite said, wait a minute, my name is Rich Kotite. And they didn't win another game that season. But as we know, that was just a ridiculous collapse. I will be covering that on a future episode. Eventually gave way to Ray Rhodes. But I think after this time, I don't know what happened with this team, but they were, I almost would say they were not quite the top tier, but they were like a 1B tier in like 92, 93, 94, just the way they were playing. I think after all of this happened, they were like second or third tier. They were, hey, we're in a wild card game. And I think that season in 1993 set them up for failure. Even when they made the playoffs under Ray Rhodes, it was sort of like, hey, maybe we'll win a game. But I don't think anybody ever expected them to do anything after that wild card round. They were just kind of like, hey, thanks for not sucking. You're going to make the playoffs and win a game, but then you're going to lose. So there you go. So the 1993 team, what could have been if the injury bug didn't bite them in the same game? I think to me, that's the big takeaway. This happened in the same game to your two top offensive players. And it just completely blew the game to shit or the season. And obviously, you're not going to win anything with Bubby Brister. Sorry, Bubby. So, if you're out there, if you know the Bill Brocious story when he intercepted Bubby Brister, please let me know. Make sure you like and subscribe both Back to the Future and This Day in Philly Sports History, wherever you get your podcasts. Check me out on YouTube. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram, Twitter and TikTok, Jimbo_Mont. I'll be having a new This Day in Philly Sports History coming at you tomorrow morning. And until next time, I will see you when I see you.